They said I was getting in the way of the wedding photos and asked me to step aside, so I left and took with me the photographer I had personally hired. If you're watching this, subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. My name is Eleanor Reynolds, and this is how I fought back. I should have known something was wrong the moment Richard entered our lives. The restaurant buzzed with excitement as Amanda, my only daughter, showed off her engagement ring, the candlelight catching the diamond in a way that made it wink like a secret between conspirators. "Mom, we're getting married!" Amanda squealed, her hand clasped in Richard's. At 49, my daughter had the same sparkle in her eyes I remembered from when she was 7. "I couldn't be happier," I said, meaning every word. 15 years a widow, I dedicated my life to 2 things: my daughter and my photography studio in Providence. This moment, seeing Amanda truly happy, was everything I'd saved for. "I want to pay for the wedding," I blurted out. "Everything. I've been saving for this moment my entire life." I opened my purse and slid the bank statement across the table, showing the substantial sum I'd accumulated over decades. Richard's eyes flickered momentarily before his face settled into practiced gratitude. "That's incredibly generous, Eleanor." "And Martin could photograph the wedding," I suggested, thinking of my business partner of 25 years. "He just won that National Portrait Award." Richard's fingers tightened around Amanda's, a look passed between them that I couldn't quite interpret. "We're thinking of something more contemporary," Amanda replied, her voice slightly higher than normal. The Amanda I knew would have loved having Martin shoot her wedding. He'd photographed every milestone since her college graduation. My sister-in-law Helen arrived late, full of apologies and air kisses. At 70, Helen carried the Montgomery family wealth with grace and subtle jewelry that cost more than my car. "To the happy couple," Helen raised her glass. "The Montgomery side of the family is thrilled." I noticed how Richard's attention shifted, his body angling toward Helen, eyes gleaming as she mentioned her late husband's investment portfolio. "I'd love to hear more about your family's investment approach sometime," Richard said, all white teeth and practiced charm. Later that night, as I stood in my kitchen alone, I placed my hands on the cool granite countertop and took a deep breath. The slight tremor in my fingers betrayed my unease. Something had shifted in Amanda tonight, a subtle realignment, like a portrait where the subject has moved just slightly, creating an image that's technically correct but somehow wrong. I picked up a framed photograph from the counter Amanda at 30, laughing as we hiked in Vermont. Her eyes looked directly into my camera, open and trusting. The woman at dinner tonight had looked at Richard before answering every question, as if checking for approval. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. Richard thinks you're wonderful." Not, "I think you're wonderful." Not, "We think you're wonderful." Richard thinks. I set the frame down and felt the first cold fingers of dread wrap around my heart. "Eleanor, those ideas are a bit antiquated, don't you think?" Richard's voice cut through my suggestion about the table arrangements. The wedding planner's eyes darted between us, pencil hovering above her notepad. I bit my tongue. This marked the 6th time he'd dismissed my input in 30 minutes. "Perhaps we should consider what Amanda wants," I said carefully. "Amanda agrees with me. Don't you, sweetheart?" His arm snaked around my daughter's waist, pulling her closer. Amanda nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Let's go with Richard's concept, Mom." Later, when Richard stepped away to take a call, I found a moment alone with Amanda. "Honey, is everything okay? You seem different lately." Amanda's posture stiffened. "Richard says you're trying to control everything. He says it's a pattern you've always had." The accusation hit like ice water. "Control? I've never—" "You have, Mom. I just never noticed before." Amanda's voice had that rehearsed quality I recognized from her childhood acting classes. At home that evening, I found the wedding invitations already printed and stacked on my dining table. They read, "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds request the pleasure of your company." I hadn't been consulted. Worse, they implied my deceased husband was still alive. "It's just protocol, Eleanor," Richard explained the next day, his tone dripping with condescension. "Standard wedding etiquette." I watched as he pulled Amanda aside after every interaction with me, whispering in her ear while glancing in my direction. She always returned from these huddles slightly more distant. Caroline Thornton arrived from Chicago with a flurry of designer luggage and immediately took control. "Mothers can be so suffocating during wedding planning," she announced during lunch. I've always given Richard his space. That's why we're so close. I noticed how she and Richard exchanged glances whenever Helen discussed her financial advisor or mentioned the family trust. That night, I stared at old photographs spread across my bed, decades of Amanda's life captured through my lens. First steps, graduations, her first apartment. In every image, her eyes held the same openness, the same trust. When had that disappeared? How had I missed the moment my daughter started looking at me like a stranger? I picked up my phone to call Martin, but hesitated. What would I even say? My daughter's fiancé is systematically cutting me out of her life? It sounded paranoid, even to me. Instead, I sent a text to Amanda. Love you, sweetheart. Always here for you. The reply came hours later. Thanks, Mom. Richard says I need to set better boundaries. Richard says. I clutched the photo of Amanda's college graduation, my fingers trembling as they traced her smiling face. Someone was erasing me from my daughter's life, pixel by pixel, memory by memory, and I was running out of time to stop it. The rehearsal dinner sparkled with expensive champagne and practiced laughter. I searched for my name card among the elegantly arranged tables, finally finding it in the far corner, separated from Amanda by a sea of unfamiliar faces. There must be some mistake, I murmured to the wedding coordinator, a slim woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. No mistake, Mrs. Reynolds. These arrangements were approved by the bride and groom. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. From my isolated position, I watched Helen seated prominently at the main table, between Richard and his mother. Caroline leaned in frequently, whispering things that made Helen laugh. When I stood to make a toast, Richard subtly signaled to the coordinator. Before I could reach the microphone, the woman intercepted me. Perhaps later, Mrs. Reynolds. We're running behind schedule. I retreated to the bathroom, gripping the marble countertop as the room spun around me. The door swung open, and Amanda entered, freezing when she saw me. Mom? Are you okay? I straightened up, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Why am I seated so far away from you, Amanda? Why am I being treated like an unwelcome guest at my only daughter's wedding? Her expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. Richard says you're trying to make this wedding about yourself. He says you're jealous because Dad isn't here. The cruelty of the accusation stole my breath. Amanda, I've never... Just stop trying to control everything. She turned to leave, then paused. Richard says you've always been possessive, and now I can see it. After she left, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to steady my breathing. As I exited the bathroom, I noticed Martin had arrived early to check photography angles for tomorrow. You look like you could use some air, he said quietly, guiding me toward the garden doors. Outside, Martin aimed his camera at the rose trellises, but I noticed his lens was actually focused on Richard, who stood in an alcove with a stranger, a thin man with salt and pepper hair. The men's body language was tense, conspiratorial. Who's that? I whispered. Don't know, but I've been capturing some interesting moments. Martin showed me his camera screen. Richard was handing the man an envelope. Keep that, I said. Later that night, I discovered my hotel room had been changed from the family floor to a smaller room near the ice machines. Mr. Thornton called to rearrange some accommodations, the receptionist explained apologetically. In my downgraded room, I called Martin. Something's very wrong, I whispered, afraid even the walls might be reporting back to Richard. Amanda has never spoken to me the way she did tonight. It's like she's been programmed. I've been watching him, Martin replied. The way he isolates her, how he's always whispering in her ear after anyone else speaks to her. Eleanor, I've seen this before. In domestic violence awareness campaigns I've photographed. It's textbook isolating behavior. My hand trembled as I hung up the phone. The wedding was tomorrow. I was running out of time. The bridal suite buzzed with activity makeup artists, hairstylists, and bridesmaids flitting around like colorful birds. I approached the door, a vintage pearl hairpin in hand, a family heirloom worn by 3 generations of brides. Caroline intercepted me, blocking the doorway with her slim body. Eleanor, dear, Amanda is terribly busy with the girls. Perhaps wait in the lounge? I'm her mother, I said, the words sticking in my throat. Caroline's smile tightened. Of course you are, but there's simply no room right now. Relegated to a settee in the hallway, I watched as strangers entered and exited the suite where my daughter prepared for her wedding day. A lifetime of milestones flashed through my mind. First day of school, first heartbreak. College graduation, I had been there for every moment. Until now. Sophia, Amanda's friend since college, emerged from the suite looking troubled. Seeing me alone in the hallway, she hesitated, then sat beside me. "Something's off, Eleanor," she whispered, glancing back at the door. "Amanda's not herself. She barely spoke to any of us all morning. Every decision goes through Richard or his mother first." "When did this start?" I asked, clutching the hairpin. "After the engagement. It was gradual at first, then." Sophia shook her head. "It's like she's reading from a script." When I finally gained entrance to the suite, Amanda stood fully dressed in her wedding gown, a stranger's reflection in the mirror. "I wanted to help you get ready," I said, fighting tears. "Caroline took care of everything," Amanda replied flatly. "I noticed she wasn't wearing my mother's pearl necklace, the one we'd discussed months ago. Instead, an unfamiliar diamond pendant hung from her neck. A gift from Richard's family," Amanda explained before I could ask. "Caroline says it's been worn by Thornton brides for generations." We stood alone briefly as the makeup artist stepped out. I reached for her hand. "Amanda, what's happening between us? You've never been this distant before." For a split second, uncertainty flickered across her face. Her fingers tightened around mine, and I glimpsed my daughter beneath the carefully constructed facade. "Mom, The door swung open as Caroline returned. "The coordinator needs you for a final check." "Amanda." The moment shattered. Amanda withdrew her hand and straightened her shoulders. "Nothing's happening, Mom. You just need to give me space." As she walked away, I noticed a small stain on the back of her dress, something no one had caught in all the preparations. Without thinking, I reached for a damp cloth and stepped toward her. "Don't touch the dress," Caroline snapped. "We have professionals for that." I stood frozen, cloth in hand, as a stranger tended to my daughter's wedding gown. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, Caroline announced, ushering everyone out. "Eleanor, they need you for seating arrangements." In the hallway, I opened my palm and stared at the pearl hairpin 5 generations of women in my family, a chain broken today. Sophia squeezed my shoulder as she passed. "Fight for her, Eleanor," she whispered. "Something's very wrong here." I tucked the hairpin into my purse and straightened my spine. The photographer in me recognized what was happening. I was being carefully cropped out of the frame of my daughter's life, but they had underestimated one crucial detail. No one knows composition better than a photographer with 50 years of experience, and I wasn't ready to be erased. "Eleanor, you're in the way. We need photos of just the immediate family now." Richard's words sliced through the post-ceremony excitement. We stood on the venue's grand staircase, Martin orchestrating formal portraits with professional efficiency. "But I am immediate family," I stammered, confusion washing over me. "I'm the mother of the bride." Richard's smile never reached his eyes. "You know what I mean. Just Amanda and my side for now." The wedding coordinator gently took my elbow. "Mrs. Reynolds, perhaps you'd like to join the cocktail hour? We'll call you when it's your turn." Humiliation burned through me as I was escorted away like an unwanted extra in my daughter's life. Guests glanced curiously in my direction, whispers following in my wake. I retreated to a quiet alcove, legs trembling so badly I feared they might give way. From this vantage point, I noticed Martin systematically documenting not just the posed portraits, but candid interactions throughout the venue. His camera lingered on Richard's conversations with Helen and other wealthy family members from my late husband's side. "He's been buzzing around Helen like a bee to honey," Martin murmured, appearing beside me with 2 champagne flutes. He handed me one, "And I've captured every moment." "Thank you for seeing what I see," I whispered. As we sipped our champagne, Richard's voice drifted from behind a nearby column. I instinctively stepped back into the shadows, pulling Martin with me. "The plan is working perfectly," Richard said, his tone entirely different from the charming cadence he used with guests. "Helen mentioned showing me the family investment portfolio next week. We need to get rid of the old lady sooner rather than later," Caroline replied. "She's becoming suspicious. After today, Amanda will be completely isolated from her. We've finally removed the obstacle." My champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Richard and Caroline went silent. "Sorry, clumsy me," Martin called out, covering the sound. He pulled me farther into the shadows as Richard and Caroline emerged, scanning the area before moving toward the reception. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Martin nodded grimly. "I've been photographing high society events for 30 years, Eleanor. I've seen con artists before, but never this elaborate." He showed me his camera display Richard in close conversation with Helen, their faces reflected in a decorative mirror that captured Richard's expression when Helen wasn't looking. The naked calculation in his eyes was chilling. "They're after the family money," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "They've been isolating Amanda from me because I would recognize what they're doing." Martin nodded. "And they've been conditioning Amanda to doubt you, to see your concerns as controlling behavior." I straightened my spine, something hardening within me. The initial shock gave way to clarity so sharp it almost hurt. "What are you going to do?" Martin asked. I watched as Richard charmed the room, his arm possessively around my daughter's waist. Amanda's smile seemed rehearsed, her eyes checking his face before responding to any guest. "I'm going to show my daughter exactly who she married," I said. "But first, we need to leave and take your memory cards with us." My hand no longer trembled as I approached the head table. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely certain of my next move. The photographer in me had finally found perfect clarity. After all, sometimes the most powerful statement in composition is what you deliberately remove from the frame. "I need all your memory cards," I whispered to Martin as we stood at the edge of the reception. My mind raced, piecing together a strategy with the same precision I once used to frame difficult shots in poor lighting. Martin nodded, discreetly transferring the used cards to his pocket. "What's our next move?" I scanned the room, noting Richard's careful positioning between Amanda and anyone from my side of the family. Caroline orchestrated the seating, ensuring Helen remained within their orbit. The scene composed itself before my eyes, like a photograph, each element deliberately placed to tell a specific story. "We're walking out," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Right now." Martin raised an eyebrow. "Bold move. You sure? They want me gone anyway. Might as well leave on my terms." I approached Amanda, who sat at the head table, Richard's hand resting possessively on her arm. Her smile faltered when she saw my expression. "Amanda, I'm leaving," I said simply. Richard's practiced smile emerged. "Feeling tired, Eleanor. Completely understandable at your age." I ignored him, focusing solely on my daughter. "I know when I'm not wanted, and since Martin is my guest and was hired by me, he's coming too." Richard's facade cracked. "You can't take the photographer. We need the wedding photos." "The photos were my gift," I replied, my voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "As was this entire wedding. Apparently my presence isn't a gift you desire." Amanda's eyes widened. "Mom, you can't." "I can, and I am." I turned to Martin. "Leave the equipment for their replacement photographer, but the photos you've already taken belong to me." Martin complied, handing his camera to his assistant with clear instructions. "The memory cards with today's shots remain my property, as contracted with Mrs. Reynolds." As we turned to leave, I caught Helen watching the scene with shrewd eyes. Our gazes locked, and something passed between us, a flicker of recognition. Perhaps she'd been married to my brother for 40 years. She knew our family's patterns, and what she was witnessing now wasn't part of them. In the parking lot, my composure finally cracked. I leaned against Martin's car, tears burning trails down my cheeks. "You did well in there," Martin said. "Martin," his voice gentle, like a general making a strategic retreat. I wiped my eyes, refusing to let mascara-stained tears ruin this critical moment. "This isn't a retreat, it's a repositioning." At the studio, I discarded my formal attire for comfortable jeans and a sweater, pulling my silver hair into its customary bun. In my element, surrounded by equipment I'd mastered over 5 decades, my mind cleared. "Show me everything," I instructed Martin, who was already uploading the memory cards. As images populated the screen, I felt my professional eye take over. Where others might see beautiful wedding photos, I cataloged micro-expressions, patterns of movement, and telling juxtapositions. "There," I pointed to a series showing Richard with the unknown man from the rehearsal dinner. "And there," another showing Caroline whispering to Helen while eyeing her diamond brooch. "We need help," I said finally. "Someone who understands what we're seeing." I reached for my phone and dialed Diane Bennett, my attorney of 30 years. "Diane, it's Eleanor. I need your help with a matter involving potential fraud, and I need it immediately." As I hung up, Martin looked at me with newfound respect. "I've known you for 25 years, and I've never seen this side of you. I glanced at the monitors displaying dozens of images from the wedding evidence of an elaborate con targeting my family. They made a critical error in their composition, I said, zooming in on Richard's calculating expression as he spoke to Helen. They showed me exactly who they are. Martin nodded. What's our next move? We gather evidence, build a case, and teach my daughter how to really see again. I straightened my shoulders, feeling stronger than I had in months. They wanted to erase me, Martin. Instead, they gave me the perfect darkroom to develop their true image. Over the next 3 weeks, our investigation progressed with methodical precision. While Amanda and Richard enjoyed their honeymoon in Bali, paid for by my savings, Martin, Michael Reeves, the private investigator Diane recommended, and I worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Richard Thornton is actually Richard Taylor, Michael explained, spreading documents across my dining room table. He's a known con artist with a pattern of targeting wealthy families through their female members. The records revealed previous marriages, followed by mysterious financial losses and Richard's subsequent disappearance. My stomach twisted as I recognized the pattern isolation of the target from protective family members, followed by access to wealthy relatives, culminating in investment opportunities that vanished along with Richard. Caroline isn't his mother, Michael continued. She's a longtime accomplice who plays different roles in his schemes. Sometimes she's his mother, sometimes his sister or business partner. Martin sorted through photographs from the wedding, creating a timeline of Richard's movements. He spent 43 minutes with Helen, showing her documents on his phone. And this man, he pointed to the stranger from the rehearsal dinner, appears in at least 12 shots, always watching Richard's interactions with wealthier guests. James Wilson, Michael supplied. He poses as the investment manager who eventually receives and transfers the victim's money. My hands trembled as I lifted a photo of Amanda, her smile tight, eyes constantly checking Richard's expression before speaking. My daughter is married to a predator, I whispered. There's more, Michael said gently. I located his former assistant, Jennifer Clark. She witnessed his last con and kept documentation as insurance when she suspected what was happening. Diane arrived, bringing coffee and legal expertise. We need to be strategic, she warned. If we move too quickly, Amanda might react defensively. Richard has spent months conditioning her to distrust you. I nodded, remembering Amanda's rehearsed accusations about my controlling behavior. We need evidence Amanda can't dismiss, I said, and we need to approach her carefully. If she feels ambushed, she'll retreat further into Richard's narrative. The police financial crimes unit is already investigating Richard and his associates, Michael added, but they lack sufficient evidence for formal charges. I studied the photographs spread across the table, images of my daughter's wedding day, revealing a calculated scheme rather than a celebration of love. My photography skills had captured the truth, even when I hadn't fully recognized it. I have an idea, I said finally, the plan forming like an image in a developing tray. We need to set the stage for Richard to reveal himself. Not to us, we already know who he is, but to Amanda. You're talking about a sting operation, Diane said. Eyebrows raised. I'm talking about careful composition, I corrected. Creating a scenario where the truth emerges naturally, where Amanda can see it with her own eyes. I outlined my plan, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to consideration. It's risky, Diane warned. If Richard realizes what you're doing, he won't, I interrupted, because he believes he's already won. In his mind, I'm just a discarded obstacle, an elderly woman too heartbroken by her daughter's rejection to fight back. I picked up a wedding photo where I stood alone at the edge of the frame, deliberately cropped out of the family grouping. Richard thinks he's erased me from this picture, I said, a cold determination settling in my chest. He doesn't realize I'm the one who understands exactly how the camera works. Michael nodded slowly. What's our first move? We start with Helen, I replied, and then we create a perfect frame that captures Richard exactly as he is. For the first time since Amanda announced her engagement, I felt the fog of confusion lift. Richard had spent months gaslighting me, making me question my own perceptions. But in my studio, surrounded by evidence of his deception, I reclaimed my clarity. The photographer in me knew, sometimes the truth only emerges when you adjust the lighting to reveal what's hiding in the shadows. Thank you for meeting me, I said, clasping Helen's hands across the table at her favorite calf. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and Amanda and Richard had returned from their honeymoon 2 days ago. Helen studied my face, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. Your call intrigued me. You mentioned concerns about investments? Yes. I kept my voice low. Has Richard approached you about investment opportunities? Helen's slight hesitation told me everything. He's mentioned some promising ventures, very enthusiastic about them. Before you make any decisions, I'd like you to meet someone. I nodded toward Michael, who sat at a nearby table pretending to read a newspaper. He approached, introducing himself as a financial analyst. Mrs. Montgomery, he said, using Helen's preferred title. I've reviewed the prospectus Mr. Thornton has been circulating. May I ask if he's requested any funds yet? Helen's expression tightened. He suggested an initial investment of $250,000 to secure my position. When I asked for more documentation, he became unsettled. Michael nodded, unsurprised. And did he explain the unusually high guaranteed returns? He said something about exclusive access to emerging markets. Helen's eyes narrowed. Eleanor, what's going on? I slid a folder across the table. Richard isn't who he claims to be. Helen's hands trembled slightly as she examined the evidence Richard's previous identities, the pattern of frauds, Caroline's various roles in his schemes. Her face paled when she reached the police reports from his previous victims. Dear God, she whispered. Amanda is deeply under his influence, I finished, which is why I need your help. The next evening, I hosted a dinner at my home to celebrate the newlyweds' return. The guest list was carefully curated. Helen, Amanda, and Richard, Martin, Michael, introduced as a family friend interested in investments, and Jennifer Clark, positioned as my new studio assistant. I spent the day preparing, not just the meal, but the stage for what would unfold. Martin set up discreet recording equipment legal in our state with one-party consent and positioned family photos strategically around the dining room. When Amanda arrived, she embraced me stiffly. Mom, this is unexpected. Richard thought you might be upset after the wedding. Water under the bridge, I replied, noting how she glanced at Richard for approval after every statement. I just wanted to celebrate your return. Throughout dinner, I guided the conversation naturally toward finances and investments. Richard, unable to resist an opportunity, began enthusiastically explaining his latest venture. Michael asked pointed, technically precise questions that Richard struggled to answer convincingly. These projected returns seem unusually high, Michael noted, examining the document Richard had brought along. What's the risk mitigation strategy? Richard's confident facade cracked slightly. It's proprietary information. I've never heard of this fund manager, Helen interjected, following our plan perfectly. My financial advisor has been managing Montgomery Investments for 30 years. Perhaps he should review this? Richard's jaw tightened. These opportunities move quickly. Too much delay means missing out. Jennifer, who had remained quiet, suddenly spoke. The structure reminds me of a venture I worked on in Boston last year. She described a pattern identical to Richard's proposal, making eye contact with me as Richard's expression darkened. Different approach entirely, Richard snapped, his charming demeanor slipping further. After dinner, Richard cornered me in the kitchen. What game are you playing, Eleanor? I met his gaze steadily. No game. Just a mother wanting to understand her son-in-law's business. Stay out of my way, he hissed. Mask completely dropped. Amanda doesn't need you anymore. I've made sure of that. I smiled calmly. We'll see. Later, as guests departed, Helen squeezed my hand. I'm calling my attorney tomorrow. No investments with Richard. Martin confirmed he'd captured everything Richard's inconsistent explanations. His growing agitation when questioned. His threatening behavior in the kitchen. Phase 1 complete, I said after everyone left. Now for the hardest part. Michael nodded grimly. Reaching Amanda. I touched a photo of my daughter taken years ago, her smile genuine, eyes clear and unburdened. He's constructed a wall between us, brick by brick. Now we need to create a door she can walk through herself. The next morning, I prepared the most important portfolio of my career, not photographs for a client, but evidence that might save my daughter's future. The following day, I waited until Richard left for a business meeting before visiting Amanda at her condo. When she opened the door, surprise flickered across her face. Mom, Richard didn't mention you were coming by. I didn't tell him, I replied simply. May I come in? Just for a few minutes? Hesitation crossed her features, that new habit of wondering what Richard would want her to do. Finally, she stepped aside. The condo felt different, Richard's influence evident in the rearranged furniture and removal of family photos I'd given Amanda over the years. A single framed wedding photo stood on the mantel, Amanda and Richard alone, no family visible. "I brought you something," I said, placing a leather-bound album on the coffee table. "Just some old memories." Amanda sat cautiously beside me as I opened the album. The first pages contained photos from her childhood, her father teaching her to ride a bike, her high school graduation, the day we opened the photography studio together before she left for college. "Remember how you used to help me in the darkroom?" I asked, pointing to a photo of teenage Amanda developing prints. A genuine smile touched her lips. "Dad always said I had a good eye." I turned the page to more recent photos, Amanda at 30, confident and strong-willed. "You were always so independent. Your father and I raised you to think for yourself." "Mom," she began, that defensive tone creeping back. "Just look," I said gently, turning to the final pages. Here were the photographs from the wedding and rehearsal dinner, carefully selected shots showing Richard's controlling behavior. Richard steering Amanda away from conversations with my friends. Richard whispering in her ear after every interaction with me. Richard's expression when speaking to Helen versus his expression when Helen looked away. "What is this?" Amanda's voice wavered. "It's what Martin and I saw happening," I explained quietly. "This is why I left the wedding. Not because I was upset about being excluded, but because I recognized what was happening." I showed her the side-by-side images of Richard with his previous wives. The pattern, unmistakable. Then the evidence Michael had gathered, Richard's real identity, his criminal history, Caroline's various roles in his schemes. "This is ridiculous," Amanda said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "Richard explained that you've always been controlling and jealous of my relationships." "Have I ever been controlling before, Richard?" I asked softly. "Think back to your previous relationships. Did I ever interfere?" Amanda's hands trembled as she flipped through the evidence. "He said you were getting worse with age, that you couldn't stand not being the center of attention. And you believed that? After 50 years of knowing me?" Tears filled her eyes. "He always has an explanation for everything. When I question our finances or his late-night calls," I covered her hand with mine. "Just promise me you'll verify these things yourself. You're a brilliant businesswoman, Amanda. Use those skills now." Before leaving, I handed her a USB drive. "Everything is here, the evidence, witness statements, police reports. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to investigate for yourself." At the door, Amanda hugged me, the first genuine embrace since before the engagement. "What if you're right?" she whispered, fear threading through her voice. "Then we'll handle it together," I promised, "like we always have." As I drove home, I called Michael. "She's looking at the evidence. Now we prepare for Richard's reaction when he realizes his control is slipping." That evening, Amanda called. Her voice sounded stronger than it had in months. "I checked the account where we deposited the wedding gifts," she said without preamble. "Over $30,000 is missing. Richard said he was investing it, but there's no record of any investment." I closed my eyes briefly, relief washing through me. "What do you want to do?" "I need to know everything," she replied, determination replacing fear. "And then I need to end this." "We'll help you," I promised. "But be careful. Don't let him know you're suspicious." "I won't," she said. "I learned from the best, Mom. You taught me how to see what others miss." As I hung up, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. The fog of doubt Richard had created was finally lifting, not just for me, but for Amanda too. The time for evidence gathering was over. Now came the confrontation. "He's coming home at 7, Amanda said, her voice steady over the phone. "I've arranged for the police financial crimes unit to be listening in the next room. Can you be here?" "Of course," I replied. 2 weeks had passed since I'd shown Amanda the evidence, and she'd spent that time verifying everything, independently checking accounts, contacting Richard's references, even hiring her own investigator. The transformation in her was remarkable. With each discovery, each confirmation of Richard's deception, I watched my daughter re-emerge from behind the facade he'd constructed around her. I arrived at her condo an hour early. Detective Lauren Reyes from the Financial Crimes Unit was already there with 2 officers, setting up recording equipment in the spare bedroom. "We've been building a case against Taylor for months," Detective Reyes explained. "His real name is Richard Taylor, and he's wanted in 3 states. Your evidence was the missing piece we needed." Amanda paced the living room, her posture straighter than I'd seen in months. She'd cut her hair the long waves Richard had insisted she maintain, now replaced with a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. "The police could arrest him without your involvement." Amanda shook her head. "I need to confront him myself. He took away my voice. I'm taking it back." The confidence in her eyes reminded me so powerfully of her father that my heart ached. James Reynolds had never tolerated dishonesty. Our daughter was truly his child. At 6:58 p.m., Amanda positioned herself at the dining table, surrounded by financial documents. I joined the officers in the spare bedroom, watching through a crack in the door. Richard arrived precisely at 7, calling out as he entered. "Amanda, something smells amazing." "In here," Amanda replied, her voice neutral. Richard entered the dining room, freezing when he saw the papers spread across the table. "What's all this?" "Our financial records," Amanda said calmly. "Or rather, what's left of them. I'm having trouble tracking $180,000 from my personal savings. Perhaps you can help me understand where it went." Richard's expression shifted surprise, calculation, then the smooth charm I'd come to recognize as his default mask. "Sweetheart, you know I invested that in the Malaysian tech fund we discussed." "That's interesting," Amanda replied, sliding a document forward. "Because I contacted every legitimate Malaysian tech fund. None have any record of our investment." Richard's mask slipped slightly. "There must be some confusion. I worked through a private broker." "James Wilson?" Amanda asked. "Or should I call him James Peterson, as he was known during your previous marriage to Catherine Thompson in Seattle?" The color drained from Richard's face. "What have you been doing?" "Due diligence," Amanda replied. "Something I should have done before the wedding." Richard switched tactics, his expression softening as he reached for her hand. "Amanda, I don't know what your mother has been telling you." "My mother has nothing to do with this," Amanda interrupted, pulling her hand away. "I verified everything myself. Your previous identities, your pattern of marriages followed by financial fraud, Caroline's role as your accomplice." Richard's face hardened. "This is ridiculous. You're acting crazy." "Gaslighting. Another predictable tactic." Amanda stood, power radiating from her posture. "The Richard Taylor I married doesn't exist. Neither does the Amanda you thought you married, the compliant, isolated woman who doubts her own perceptions." Richard lunged for the documents, but Amanda was faster, stepping back as his true nature fully emerged. "You think you're so clever," he snarled. "Your mother put you up to this. That interfering bitch never gave us a chance." Amanda smiled coldly. "There it is, the real Richard Taylor." "You have no proof of anything," he spat. "Actually, we have everything," I said, stepping into the room with Detective Reyes, "including your confession just now." As the officers arrested Richard, reading him his rights, Amanda stood tall, watching without a hint of the uncertainty that had clouded her for months. Outside, after the police car drove away, Amanda turned to me. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." I embraced her tightly. "He was very good at what he did, but you were better." She pulled back, her eyes clear and determined. "We have more work to do. Caroline and James are still out there." I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. "Then let's finish this. Together. Caroline Thornton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and money laundering." I watched from the hotel lobby as police officers led Caroline away in handcuffs, her designer outfit incongruous with the steel restraints. The coordinated arrests of Richard's accomplices had been executed simultaneously across 3 states. Amanda stood beside me, her face impassive as she watched the woman who had posed as her mother-in-law being placed in a police car. "She told me my wedding dress made me look old," Amanda said suddenly, a hint of dark humor in her voice. "Said Richard deserved a bride who looked fresh." I squeezed her hand. "You've never looked more beautiful than you do right now." It was true. 3 months after Richard's arrest, Amanda radiated a strength and clarity that transcended physical appearance. She'd thrown herself into helping the investigation, identifying other potential victims, and testifying before a grand jury. Back at my home, we spread documents across the dining table, the same table where I'd first confronted Richard with Helen's help. Now it supported evidence for the prosecution's case. "The district attorney says Richard's refusing all plea deals," Amanda explained, sorting through statements. "He still believes he can charm a jury. That arrogance will be his downfall," I replied. Martin arrived with coffee and his latest photographs documentation of James Wilson's arrest in Chicago. The FBI found offshore accounts linking him to 6 different fraud schemes, he reported. They're offering him a deal to testify against Richard. The doorbell rang, and Diane entered with Jennifer Clark, Richard's former assistant who had become a key witness. "We have a problem," Diane announced. "Richard's demanding to speak with Amanda before trial." Amanda looked up sharply. "Why would I agree to that?" "You shouldn't," Diane advised. "It's a manipulation tactic." "No," Amanda said after a moment, straightening her shoulders. "I want to hear what he has to say." Later that week, in a conference room at the detention center, Amanda faced Richard across a metal table. I watched through one-way glass, my heart pounding. Richard had lost weight, his designer clothes replaced by a jumpsuit, but his eyes still held that calculating gleam. "You look good," he began, his voice softening to the tone that had once made Amanda doubt herself. "What do you want, Richard?" Amanda's voice remained steady. He leaned forward. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. The investments were legitimate, just high risk. I was trying to build a future for us. By stealing from me and targeting my aunt?" Amanda replied coolly. Richard's expression shifted, trying another angle. "Your mother manipulated you. She's always been jealous of our relationship. She planted these ideas." "Stop," Amanda interrupted. "I've reviewed every financial record, every communication. I've spoken to your previous victims. I know exactly who you are." Richard's mask slipped, anger flashing in his eyes. "You ungrateful bitch. I made you interesting. Before me, you were just another middle-aged woman desperate for attention." Amanda smiled, completely unfazed. "Thank you for showing your true self one last time. It confirms everything I needed to know." She stood to leave, but Richard called after her. "The money's gone, Amanda. You'll never get it back." Amanda turned, her gaze steady. "Keep it. It bought me something priceless, the truth about who I am and what I'm capable of." As she walked out, Richard shouted obscenities that echoed through the monitoring system, but Amanda never looked back. Outside, she exhaled slowly. He really thought he could manipulate me again. I embraced her. "He never truly knew you. That was his biggest mistake." "No," Amanda replied thoughtfully. "His biggest mistake was underestimating you. A 74-year-old photographer he thought he could simply erase." As we drove home, Amanda looked out at the autumn leaves beginning to turn. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," I said, "we rebuild, not what was, but something stronger." She nodded, determination replacing uncertainty. "I'd like that." For the first time in over a year, I felt the weight lifting from both our shoulders. Richard had tried to erase me from my daughter's life. Instead, he had only brought us closer together, our bond forged stronger through fire. 6 months later, I adjusted my camera, focusing on Amanda as she addressed the room full of women. The community center was packed for her presentation on recognizing financial predators and emotional manipulation. "Trust your instincts," Amanda told the audience, her voice confident and clear. "If someone is working to isolate you from friends and family, there's a reason. If they make you question your own perceptions, that's called gaslighting." I didn't know that term before, but I lived it. I captured her expression as she spoke, the strength in her stance, the conviction in her gestures, the clarity in her eyes. So different from the uncertain woman who had stood beside Richard at her wedding. Richard had been sentenced to 15 years for fraud and money laundering. Caroline received 8 years, while James Wilson had negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against their wider network. The evidence we gathered had led to the prosecution of similar operations in 2 other states. After the presentation, Amanda joined me on the drive home, both of us comfortable in the silence that had always characterized our relationship before Richard. "I got the final insurance settlement today," she said, as we turned onto my street. "They're covering most of the financial losses." "That's wonderful news," I replied. Amanda nodded. "I'm thinking of using it to expand the studio. The photography therapy program you started for survivors is growing faster than you can handle alone." I smiled, remembering how the idea had come to me during Richard's trial. Photography had always been my way of seeing truth clearly. It seemed natural to offer that clarity to others emerging from deception. At home, we settled on the porch with tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in gentle pinks and golds. Martin joined us briefly, dropping off prints from his latest session before heading out to photograph a high school graduation. "He's different around you now," Amanda observed after he left, more attentive. I felt warmth rise to my cheeks. We've been having dinner together twice a week, just as friends. Amanda smiled knowingly. If you say so. We lapsed into comfortable silence again, the evening wrapping around us like a familiar blanket. How did you know? Amanda asked suddenly. About Richard, from the beginning. How did you see what I couldn't? I considered the question carefully. I've spent 50 years training my eye to notice what others miss. Light, shadow, composition, they tell the true story if you know how to read them. I paused, choosing my words. And I knew you, the real you. When that began to disappear, I knew someone was manipulating the image. Amanda reached for my hand. I'm sorry I doubted you. When he told me you were controlling, jealous, manipulative, I should have known better. He was very good at what he did, I replied, and we all have vulnerabilities he could exploit. For you, it was your desire to find love after years of focusing on your career. For me, it was my fear of being unnecessary in your life as you grew older. You could never be unnecessary, Amanda said firmly. We watched as the last colors faded from the sky, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue. I have something for you, I said, reaching beside my chair for a wrapped package. Amanda opened it to find a new camera, professional grade, with all the features she'd admired when we worked together in the studio years ago. Mom, this is too much. The studio partnership papers are inside the box, I continued. If you're serious about joining me, equal partners, Reynolds and Reynolds Photography. Tears filled Amanda's eyes. Are you sure? After everything I said, how I treated you. The past is just that past, I interrupted gently. We're focusing on a new composition now. As if to demonstrate, I raised my ever-present camera and captured her in that moment of vulnerability and strength, tears on her cheeks, but determination in her eyes. The porch light creating a perfect halo around her silver-streaked hair. Amanda laughed, wiping her eyes. Always the photographer. Some habits never change, I agreed, reviewing the image on my display screen. Perfect composition. Amanda moved to sit beside me, examining the photo. You made me visible again, she said softly. When Richard nearly erased me, I shook my head. You were never erased, just temporarily obscured. The real you was always there, waiting for the right light. We sat together as night fully descended. 2 generations of Reynolds women, our bond tested and strengthened. Richard had tried to come between us, to rewrite our story for his benefit. Instead, he had inadvertently created a new chapter 1 where we emerged stronger, clearer and more connected than before. To seeing clearly, Amanda said, raising her teacup. I lifted mine in response, and to never being erased. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.